Welcome to Grief Uprooted, a podcast dedicated to sharing your grief stories. Together, we embark on the mystery of one's grief journey as they learn to live, heal, and be courageous in a world rooted in trauma. Join myself, Christine, in an open discussion to help you uproot the grief in all our lives. I am an award-winning author, professional speaker, and humanitarian in the field of grief and trauma. I want you to be part of the discussion. Hurt, help, and hope. When you hear those three words, what comes to your mind? I know a lot of you are tuning in and going, well, my mind is spinning and I can't really bring it back to really even consider what you're saying, Christine, but I'm going to say it again. Hurt, help, and hope. Kind of really an interesting title for a book. And I am super excited to be having with me today two authors, Clarissa and Fiona Mall. The interesting part about this duo is one is a teenager and one is a mom. So I want to introduce you to teenage grief. And I think what's really interesting about this episode is we're talking to a mom too. And when you put those two things together, really, how would you handle the idea that your daughter, your teenage daughter, is grieving alongside with you? So these two amazing women have come together and joined ventures and authoring an amazing book. But in that, they're willing to share their story, not only with me, but with you. So I'd love to introduce you to Clarissa and Fiona. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, it's nice to have you here.
Thanks so
And
much.
yeah, I'm super excited about the topic. Obviously, Fiona, I'm excited that you're willing to come on. And
Yeah.
I'm going to ask a question. How old are you?
I'm 18 years old.
18, and I know what I like. That's a good age. Really good age. So I want to just start with kind of right at the beginning. Like, tell me first off where you guys are kind of tuning in from and what was life like before grief entered?
Sure.
So tell
Well,
us.
we are tuning in from New England. We live in the Boston area. And 5 years ago, we were living on the West Coast of the US and had a very full and happy life as a family of six. Fiona is the oldest of four, and we lived out there. We were a homeschooling family who loved to travel and were deeply involved with sports and our community. And then on July 19th of 2019, on a family vacation, my husband and Fiona's dad fell to his death in a hiking accident in the backcountry in the mountains. And of course, in a moment, all of the goodness of the life we had known before was really just snuffed out. And we were left with a life that had totally crumbled with that news. It was hard to believe, even a couple of days later, that we had actually lived that life before. So it was a beautiful life, and one that even today, 5 years later, we often miss.
Wow. Wow. I didn't even get to even know that tidbit of news, but you gave me goosebumps just so were you on a family vacation
We
or
were, yes.
and did he fall in front of all of you or how did this
No, we were not there. The news was delivered to us by police chaplains.
Hmm. And then so wow, that's hard to digest a little bit. Um
Yeah.
and returning home, like I guess one of my biggest questions in you being mother and daughter is the difference between grieving. Like Fiona, I'd love to kind of, I guess love is maybe the wrong word, but because I know you're going to help so many people for having the courage and the strength to come on and talk. Um, how did it feel when this news kind of came towards you? Because at this time, 5 years ago, you would be 14. Am I right?
Yes, yeah.
So if you could
Mhm.
just kind of, our listeners are obviously mothers, sisters, siblings, daughters, all age range. And it's one of those things of how did you receive that information and did you believe it right away?
Mhm.
Mm,
Yeah, I mean, when I first heard the news as I was 13 turning 14 that year. And I honestly did not believe it for a long time,
Mm.
but like it did take a while for that news to actually fully sink in. Because I had led a very regular, normal life. My family, we did sports, we went on vacation, there was nothing particularly like different about us. But now all of a sudden, like my dad was gone. I felt like a lot of my life had been uprooted, and I didn't know like who I would be anymore if I didn't have this family that I'd always had, and this like version of a family that I always had. But yeah, it was especially interesting working with my mom
Mm.
to be able to just see how our family has been able to grow beyond this and really define who we were as a family.
Yeah. And I love how you just said, like, how my life is going to change. Because I think when you're that 13 and 14, that's the
Mhm.
biggest thing. Like, how
Yeah.
does my life change? Because mom and dad aren't getting up. When I lost my brother, I was 14. And I just remembered that being so different because my parents didn't go to work. And that really hit
Hmm.
me. Like, I was like, why are you not getting up and leaving the house like you usually do? And
Hmm.
that's when I realized, okay, I haven't fully digested this.
Hmm.
This is kind of serious. And so how did your life change? Like, did you notice that being the oldest of four, um,
Hmm.
kind of wondering where you went? I don't want to put words in your mouth. So what did you do? Because now there's no dad and there's a mom. So I have an idea of what
Yeah.
I think you would do, but what
Hmm.
happened?
Yeah. Well, our family really became more of a team, and we would work together on things. We would all talk about big family decisions. Like when when we moved out of our house, we all talked about it as a family decision. And we really became more like team members with each other.
Mm.
Um, we talked to each other about big important things and about how we felt. And we always knew that each person in our family, we could rely on all of them.
Yeah, one of the things that was really important to me from the very beginning was to not cast Fiona as like a second parent, because I wanted her to experience all of what teenage life was. And even though this loss would define her and be a defining feature of her life, I didn't want it to be all of who she was. And so a big part of that was allowing her to just be normal, to still be a teenager. And so that team aspect, that team vision kind of became a way for her to be a contributing member,
Right.
also a leader, but a student leader, to be sort of a team captain where I was the coach still. And that concept, that model worked really well for us,
Mm.
so that each person had a voice, and that they could feel like they were an equal player, but they still knew that the buck ended with me, and that in the end, I, as their leader, would lead them forward into the life that we would rebuild together.
I love how you phrase that because I do a lot of coaching and working with community people. And sometimes, you come from a perspective of, I need to lead you at this time because you're hurting. And it's really hard when we ask people who are in great sorrow and great pain to start reflecting. I think that's so hard for you to do. That's why sometimes in school systems, people say, well, the principal's just picking up and going, and you've witnessed him cry, you've witnessed him feel this sorrow, but he gets up and moves, or our teachers do the same. And I think that's because we realize that these little people, not that you're little, but you were 5 years ago, are trying to process information that they're not prepared to process. A lot of them delay, really digesting. I often say emotional denial is there as a protective mechanism for the brain to go, I can only consume so much right now, and then I'll be able to move forward. So I really want to know, as a mom, um, where did you draw some support for yourself, being that here you are grieving and now you have these four children?
Yeah, that's a great question because the loss of a parent really blows up your idea of what a nuclear family would look like. And I sometimes wonder 5 years later if that's not such a terrible thing in some ways. Many times before the loss of my husband and Fiona's dad, we were just a unit, the six of us, and we didn't call upon others for support unless we really needed it. We would get a babysitter, but we paid that person. We would ask a friend to give a ride home from a baseball practice, but it was on the occasion. It wasn't regularly relying on each other. But what we realized after we lost a dad and a husband was that our village needed to be way bigger. We had to redefine what family meant. And in raising kids, I knew that there'd be no way to replace their dad, but they certainly needed other people in their lives to support them as they process their loss and try to grow. We know that for children who experience adverse childhood experiences, just having one trusted adult in their life can make a measurable, studyable difference in their lives. And so I just started looking for people who could fill those kind of roles, whether it was youth leaders, whether it was coaches, whether it was teachers at school. Anytime someone would reach out to offer care or service of some kind that was close, that I had vetted as a safe person for my kids to be with, I would try to take them up on it because in a normal scenario, teenagers don't always want to talk to their parents. And that's normal and that's okay. And I had to figure that that impulse would still exist, even though my kids had experienced loss, that there would be times in their lives where they would need trusted adults who could come around them and be present for them, either as a listening ear or just another solid, anchored support as they processed internally what they were dealing with.
And that's so true. Like I've worked in this industry for 24 years. And the reason I share that is because I believe it takes a village to raise my children. So my son became very good friends with our neighbor who since has passed, but he was an older gentleman who loved gardening. And he had to do a project at school about his hero. And that was his hero. And I was like, oh my gosh, I love that. And so I think like, you know, thankfully for your courage and your ability to open your mind and realize from grief to growth, like that's what we're looking at. We're taking an experience that these children are grieving, but we want to show them they can grow from this. They can blossom into such amazing people because you have learned a lesson in life that nobody can teach you. Nobody can, we can say till we're blue in the face, you only have one life to live and all this type of stuff. But going through grief ultimately changes you. And I have seen some amazing people come from that, and especially children when they've experienced it at a young age and had a mom who said, okay, I know my limitations and I can open the door. So kudos to you. Very, very good. Um, so I would love to know what the unique struggles you have as a teenager. What would be different than looking at like myself or mom having dealing with grief?
Yeah, that's a good question because teens are already in a very unique situation of life where you are going through high school. You emotions are high, hormones are running through your body, and you're trying to figure out who you want to become with college decisions and career decisions. And so I think with all of the questions and pressure that your teenage years already have on you, um, adding grief into that is just a really big thing. And so it can bring up a lot of questions about like who you are and where, like kind of what we talked about, like what your family is,
Mhm.
who are the people that you surround yourself with for support, and even questions about like faith and God. Um, yeah, so I think that it's an especially unique and hard time to be grieving in.
Yeah.
especially because grief is more than just emotions. And so all of those emotions that you have as a teenager, all those questions about identity, they are in a body that's rapidly changing, like Fiona said, those hormones. And we know that grief is a physical experience too. So on top of waking up in the morning and feeling like you have a different body because your voice is changing or your body is changing, now you may be struggling with sleep. You may be having changes in appetite that are sort of bewildering. You may be feeling really sluggish when you used to have tons of energy for basketball practice. And so all of the ways that grief is a physical experience layer themselves onto those emotions and can make it a really complex season of life to navigate.
For sure. And the old history, that's why people bring you food. I remember
That's right.
I was grieving. I was like, why are all these people bringing us like tuna casseroles and spaghetti and lasagna? And I used to think, this is great. Everybody's bringing us food. And then, after studying it and working in it and going, oh my goodness, this is a physical body. You are exhausted. Like you're exhausted. Your brain is going 24/7. And it is I find you nap. I even work in this industry and people will be, what are you doing? I'm just gonna go take a nap. I'm gonna, because it's exhausting. It really is. And I think that's one of the parts that people miss with grief. I think we all think it's an emotional experience and that has nothing to do with our physical body. And it's so much to do with our physical body. I know that there's a lot of, I guess, questions, myths. We got TikTok, we got all sorts of stuff out there right now. And I'm wondering, is there any like myths or things you hear that you think, yeah, that's not really what happens when it comes to being teens and grieving?
Mm. Yeah. Oh, there are so many of them. And I will say that if you're learning how to grieve via TikTok, um, buyer beware because you can get all kinds of different information. But let's see, Fiona. Okay. I'm going to tell you a myth. You tell me why it's wrong.
Okay.
I love games.
So someday my grief's going to go away.
Oh,
That's one that we hear a lot, but like time heals all wounds. But I think time actually changes all wounds. Your grief will look different as your life goes on. You might feel perfectly fine, and then one day you have your high school graduation or another big event in your life, and all of a sudden all these emotions come. So your grief will not go away as time goes on, but it will come and go in waves and it'll look differently.
That's a good one. Okay, here's another one for you. I'm trying to stump you. Let's see. Is there what would you say to someone who says my loss is not as bad as your loss?
Mhm. Yeah, that's also a very good one. A lot of people can think that like their loss is not as bad or not as hard as someone else's, like the loss of a pet or a celebrity dying might not be as bad as, say, your parent or your sibling dying, but loss looks differently for each person. And so all depends on the relationship you've had with that person, the role that they have had in your life. And so each loss looks different for each individual person, even for people who have lost the same person. So it's really not something that you can compare at all. It's only something that you can use your loss to be able to empathize with other people, but it's really not comparable. Yeah.
Okay, one last one. Real men don't cry.
I'm loving this game.
That is just not true. Whatever way you express your emotions, is the way you express your emotions is different for each person, but holding it in and bottling them down is not the right way to do it. And so sometimes you need to be strong, sometimes you need to be able to get out of bed, but more often than not, it's better to let your emotions out, to do it by listening to music or going out in nature or talking to a friend. It's always better to let your emotions out than to keep them bottled up.
My piece of advice to that, any man who cries is extremely sexy. I'm just telling you now. I just think I every time a man looks at me and says, "Oh, I'm weak, I'm crying," I'm like, "No, you are strong, you are crying. You are
Yeah.
sharing
Mhm.
your emotions. There is no greater strength than having the courage to share your emotions and who you are authentically." I
Yeah.
just love that. So
Yeah.
Mhm.
that's a very fun game, you two. We should put you on. I loved that. I love how open you are and how you're both talking and it feels like there's really a unity between the two of you that has really grown through this experience. When you think of teenagers, what kind of support as a parent? Because this is a question I get constantly. What can I do as a parent to help my teen flourish after grief has entered into our home? Um, do you have any suggestions through that?
Yeah. I wonder if there's do you have any don'ts?
Ooh,
Anything
any
I did
don'ts?
badly?
No, that
Sometimes it's easier to learn from our mistakes.
it really
I
is.
think not necessarily something you did badly, but communication is just
Mm,
very important when your kid is struggling with so many questions and trying to figure out what's normal again. I think just being able to talk with them or giving them someone to talk to is really important, and being able to communicate how you're feeling, how you're dealing with things. And then also giving them the sense that they can communicate with you about needs that they have or struggles that they're going through that you might not know about.
that's so true. Yeah. Empathetic listening is a really hard practice for us as parents.
Yeah.
Um, it is hard to listen without judgment. It is hard to listen without fixing. And it is hard to listen without controlling. But when it comes to grief, there is nothing that we can fix. There is nothing that we can control. And it really doesn't serve us well to judge. And so, practicing empathetic listening or reflective listening, being able to say, I think what I heard you say is, and sort of repeat it back to your child, can be a way that you show through your communication that you really are taking the time to hear them. I think another piece is also giving them their space. I know as a parent, after your child has experienced loss, you just never want them to be hurt again. I mean, it is the mama bear in you, it is the papa bear, it's the protector and the nurturer and the lover, but we can't protect our children from all of the hard things in the world. And that can come across kind of claustrophobic to
Yeah.
a teenager who is already trying to experience and experiment with their own autonomy and independence at this age. And so giving them space, trusting that they have wisdom to
Mhm.
know what they need. And as long as you provide them healthy channels to pursue that, that it's in some ways a letting go that is just a normal part of parenting a teen.
And that's the hardest part,
Mhm.
letting go, being able to step back and go, I need to let this go for a second and allow them to process and to gain an understanding of that. So we're just going to take a break for 1 second and we're going to be
Sure.
right back.
We interrupt this podcast for a dirty moment.
I experience a dirty moment pretty much every time I walk down the coffee aisle in the grocery store. My husband loved coffee, made it every single morning of our marriage. He always left coffee grounds on the counter. And so now, even just the smell of it makes me miss him and wish he were here.
I experience a dirty moment every time I hear the song 40 by U2, because my dad would always listen to it with me and my brothers, and it just holds so many special memories for me.
Okay, we're back. How I would love how we left that is, allowing teenagers to take that moment and process their grief on themselves independently. I think that's the hardest part. So I kind of want to ask this question, even with trauma. Parents constantly ask me, how how much is too much information? So that's kind of the question I wanted to go. I know we left it on them being able to process themselves. And when we look at it now, is it smart to be able to say to the child, this is where we're at, this is how I'm feeling? And I'm asking that particularly to yourself, Clarissa, as mom, like, and even myself as a mother. I know that I was called into the school system because my daughter, they thought, was obsessed with death. And when I went in and explained what I did for a living, they were like, oh, she's not lying. I'm like, oh, good, not. No, I did take her to a funeral home. We were dropping off supplies. I thought, oh no, should I be telling her more? Now, she was only in grade 2, but moving forward, I started to share my career with my children. And then when traumatic events happen, I started to go, okay, how much do I tell them about myself? And not having losing a spouse or anything like that, how much did you share? This is what I'm going through, and this is what I'm thinking.
Yeah, that's a really important question for parents to consider, not only in the loss of a spouse, but any kind of traumatic event, whether it's death or violence that might happen within the sphere of your family or school community, for example. I received really good information after my husband died. A friend told me, when you're thinking about what you want to tell your kids, ask yourself these two questions. What do they want to know, and what do they need to know?
Mm.
And those two questions became real guides for me as I determined how to filter the information and give them access to it. I always wanted to be truthful with them, to use real language and not euphemism. That was a really important commitment that I had to them, as just honoring their wisdom and their intelligence as people. Even though my youngest had only just turned 7, I wanted to honor her in that way. But I also wanted to remain developmentally appropriate, knowing that children were never made to bear the weight of adult world problems. And so when there was new information that I would have to determine, whether it was how I was going to manage a financial concern that I now had as a single mom, to a violent incident that had happened in the news, how I was going to let them know that that had happened, to more details about our shared loss. I tried to run it through those two filters of what do they want to know? Okay, maybe they want to know more than they actually need to know. And that's where I need to put the filter in. Or perhaps sometimes they don't want to know something, but they really do need to know it. And then determining how to convey that information in a developmentally appropriate way. So those two questions were really helpful filters for me.
That's a great idea to take that. And I think you can do that even through all forms of grief. If you're experiencing a divorce or you're experiencing some sort of challenge within grief, loss of job, it's, we worry that we're going to stress our kids out. But sometimes I think they're stressed, just trying to figure it out. They're trying to go, okay, why isn't mom doing this? What's happening here? Where are we going to go? It's that fear of the unknown. But it is an extremely fine balance. So I love your
Yeah.
two questions and I think the other one is, a lot of people in their minds think you're a child. They'll bounce back. They all bounce back, and they're going to be okay. And I know in generations before, we just didn't tell you anything. It's the whole idea of whether or not to attend a funeral. So I'd love to know and start there. Did you attend a funeral? Did all of your children come to a funeral? And was that something you collectively did together, or did you do that separately? Like, you planned it all and the kids came, or were they participating in that?
Yeah, all of the memorial activities that we had for our family, we all attended together. And one of the things that we committed to doing actually, and it's toward this idea of how do you talk to your children about things, was that there were certain parts of our grief story we wouldn't share publicly. So we determined that there would be certain things like the stories around the funeral, the stories around the night that we received the news about his death, that those were things that we were going to hold not as secrets because secrets are dangerous, but as sacred space for our family, and that each person would get to decide on his or her own when they felt comfortable to answer questions about those moments. And I think in a culture where we're so used to oversharing, we're used to seeing little John F. Kennedy saluting at his father's funeral. We're used to seeing celebrities bring their children to funerals and everyone is gawking and there are cameras. We're used to seeing a lot of performative or grief that becomes performative because it's on media. And it can give people this feeling that they can't have privacy, that they can't have a sense of sacredness, that they can't make those kind of decisions outside of the oversharing culture that we have. And so it's one of the things that it was a decision that we made sort of in the trauma of those first couple of months after our loss. But it's something that I think has helped us to create some sacred space that we can retreat to when we need to, so that each of the kids, as they're learning how to share their story, they can navigate that on their own so that they can say to a friend, hey, you know what? I don't want to talk about this particular part of my story. Or if someone casually says to them, how'd your dad die? They feel empowered to be able to say, nope, that's not something I share except for with people who are really close to me. So I think it's a really great question about the public part, like that public expressions of loss, because a lot of people want to know those questions like, should I take my kids to a funeral? Should I not? And those questions are surprisingly more sacred than I think we give them credit for. And I always encourage families to talk about those things together because it's a really precious time and it's a moment that you won't ever be able to return to.
And what I love what you're saying there is because we are an oversharing culture, even sexually. And
Yeah.
so I often get frustrated because we're teaching our children how to make children, but we're not teaching them what to do when they die. And
Yeah.
I think what you're giving your children, and what I love and how you've explained so wonderfully is self-confidence, the ability to go, I have boundaries. I don't need to share everything. I'm able to go, this is a personal experience for me. And I think that goes across all avenues. That goes your sexuality, your grief story, the challenges you're facing, educationally. These are, you don't have to give it away. Nothing has to be given away. You have that ability to say, no, that is something that I don't want to talk about. And that's okay. And I love how you're saying that because I think that broadens to so many things as parents that we can say, you don't have to share it all. You share what you're comfortable with. And I don't think we have that conversation. I really don't.
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
think we generally have that conversation until someone dies.
That's
Because
right. You want to talk about the room that we had at the funeral?
Yes.
Because this is one example of how we did that.
Yeah. One special thing that we wanted that specifically my mom was like, we need to have this at the funeral was a place for us kids to be if we needed to be alone. And she said, you are allowed to invite a friend in if you want to, but no one can go into this room unless they have your permission and unless you want to spend time with them there. But it was just a place where we could be with people that we felt really comfortable around. It was a place that we could go if we needed to cry or to cool down. And it was just a place where we could have that privacy that we needed in a funeral, which is a very public event.
yeah, and what's so great about that and I'm just encouraging everybody to get this book now, is you're giving such tangible advice. Like when you are at that moment, I'm sure, you're standing there going, my whole life just changed. Just to be able to go, it is okay to go to a funeral home and ask for a separate room. It's okay to do this, where people aren't thinking that. We're thinking we've got to go in, this is the way the tradition is. And you've never even really thought about it. And that kind of leads me to something else, maybe a little off topic, but I think super important is I have worked with families who've never had the conversation of what happens when someone dies. What happens to that human, that physical body, that spirit? And I've worked with families where I've said, before I start working with your family, I need to know your belief system. And I remember one family in particular, they said, we don't have one. And I said, okay, I understand that. Please tell me what you tell your children when someone dies. And I needed to honor that. And when I watched them, they both looked at me and said, we don't know. And as somebody to help that family, I was very confused. So I allowed the child to guide me. And I was able to reconvene with the family. And I remember that in particular, watching that family come together and go, we need to explore this. And I thought, yes, you do. And whatever you believe in, I will honor. I just realized that because trauma never hit you, we never had to make these decisions. And that is something that I look at grief and go, this is how we grow. This is how we grow because we're experiencing something. And as a mother, you have allowed them to experience it, but within boundaries that make it healthy and really they're capable of doing, right? So when we think about teenagers and how you move forward, I know that I'm sure you've heard it from your friends, like, are you over it yet? Are you good? And how many times you hear like, oh, you're done crying? Like, is it all good now? Do we talk about it? Do we not talk about it? So with teenage grief, I'm just curious, like, is this something that you feel you get over, or how does it kind of flow?
Yeah, I think grief just isn't something you can get over, and it will resurface as different life events happen, and you'll have different questions about it as your life goes on. But one thing that I have found especially helpful for me is to surround myself with people who know my story, even just a little bit of it. And whether they're people my age or adult leaders that I look up to and that mentor me. But it has just been helpful to surround myself with people like that who just know, like, maybe they're going through a hard time right now, or I know that this event might be hard for them, so I'm going to stick with them there. And so, yeah, as grief looks different as it comes and goes, it's just been very helpful for me to be able to surround myself with people who understand my story, understand me, and can just be there with me, even if they aren't trying to fix things, or even if they don't know everything about my story. Yeah, it's been a good thing that my mom has helped to build in my life, and that I've been able to grow, is that just group of people who are able to stand with me and help me as, as different emotions come and different events trigger different things.
I think one of the things that's sort of amazing and might sound weird at first is that you get to a point where you don't want the grief to leave. For a very long time, you just wish that you could be back to normal again, that grief would go away. And the longer you live with loss, after loss, with your grief, really you come to find that grief is actually less of a plague and more of a companion. That grief brings along with it more than just sadness or anger or frustration, that grief brings with it wisdom. You have altered priorities. You see things that your friends don't see. You value things in a different way. And those are great gifts to you and to the world around you. We need people who are informed by suffering and loss. Grief becomes a connection to the love that you had for your person. And so when you feel grief in these new ways that as it resurfaces, like Fiona says, as you have these groups of people like she's described who surround you, they also can remind you that grief is more than just the hard feelings. Grief can be sweet. Grief can be a sense of contentment or peace or rest. It can even bring hope, which is why we called our book Hurt, Hope, or Hurt, Help, Hope, because if all we ended with was help, then that would be great, but you'd always sort of be limping along with this thing that never left. And the reality is that grief brings with it so much more than just the hurt. And so in some ways, you realize that the lessons that are hard won in your loss are things that you never would want to miss out on. Of course, you always wish that your person were alive, that they were present with you, that they didn't have to miss all of the most important parts of your life. But you realize that in that suffering and in that sorrow, there have been hidden gifts that have arrived with this really unwelcome companion.
Yeah, and I think building onto that, your personal loss and your story becomes more of something that is about others and not just about you. The lessons that you've learned and the wisdom that you've gained isn't all for a loss. You're able to share your story with other people. You're able to comfort them. You might even just have the wisdom to know, hey, I think this person needs a coffee this morning. And just to be able to know what they're going through. And so I can very much vouch for what you just said, because through my loss and through writing this book, I've been able to help so many people and to just become a better friend. And so my loss hasn't become stuck with me, and my grief isn't just about me and what I'm going through, but it's also about the wisdom and the compassion that I have gained and that I can give to other people.
You are such an example of, you're gonna make me cry. You're such an example of what grief can do. So many times people say to me that grief has destroyed, and you are such an epiphany, and your father would be so proud of you that you are a result of what grief can do. And that is grow an amazing person, is teach a person just the lessons you can never be taught by a parent. You know, it's only something that has to be taught to you by something so much bigger than us. And you have just grasped onto that so well. You should be extremely proud of yourself, and you will make a huge difference in the world because this is intact in you. And I don't feel I come with a background unable to say that. I have worked 24 years in this industry and worked with so many people, and you will make a difference. You are making a difference. And kudos to your mother for giving you that platform. But it looks like you just picked it right up and went with it anyways. So I don't think she had much choice but to go, oh crap, this child's going. And, was able to support you in that, because that is exactly it. And in my industry, it's frustrating, so frustrating. So I love having two people like you on that, yes, we're grieving. Yes, this has happened to us, but you're realizing it is so much bigger than us. It is so much bigger. I just feel like I am a conduit that was put here to do this. I always say I'm a 6-foot redhead with a big mouth. And that's why this was, path for me, because it is something that we have to start talking about. And you two have a way of talking about it that inspires people, that makes people go, I can do this, I can make it. So I so appreciate that. So this book isn't coming out till October 8th, 2024,
Yeah.
this year. So this is,
Yes.
And I am curious, one last thing. What was it like writing together? As an author myself, that's a little frustrating. What was it like kind of getting together and going, okay, we're gonna write together?
Yeah, it was actually so much fun. Mom would write a certain section and she'd be like, okay, I need you to respond to me here and then write this little piece. And so I'd write those and then she'd build off of me. So it was very much teamwork. I remember when years ago when I would be writing essays and I'd be like, Mom, I need your help. And she'd try to help me and I'd be like, this is just not working. But it was just like the best experience. It was so much fun.
You've come a long way, baby.
I have, yes. Yeah. Yeah, she taught me so much about writing and how to share my story. Yeah, it's just been such a great experience.
That's good. That's good. Because my kids, I'm dyslexic. So my children are always like, you're using the wrong there. I know. And I'm like, well, it's obviously the other one if I've got it wrong. It's always been something. So good for you guys. So where can people buy this? I would love for you to just share your website where people can buy the book.
Yeah, you can find more about us at clarissamall.com, or you can find the book on Amazon or Barnes & Noble, wherever you like to get your books. And I'm really excited actually that the book launches in October, because October is that month after back to school rush is over, where if you've experienced a loss, that's when students start to feel the hit. We have the adrenaline rush of back to school, of the rush of getting supplies and finding your classes. But it's that next month after you've settled into your new schedule and your new routine where things tend to start to get a little shaky. And so I feel like this book's arrival at your doorstep in October will be just an extension of that school supply list for a lot of families, where students are equipped right when they need it to receive the practical kind of support, from body questions answered to emotions questions to those big existential, who am I, is there a God kind of questions that death can prompt. We tried to cover as many things as we could so that students can open it and go in their moment of need. So it can really be the kind of handbook you stuff under your pillow and read with a flashlight and dog ear and come back to time after time.
That's and so true, because when we start school, especially the loss of a parent or sibling, or really grandparent, it's when you have those events and everybody has to show up. How do we have that conversation that maybe my dad isn't going to show up, right? So true. And on that note, thank you both for coming. Absolutely loved it. And I think Clarissa and Fiona make so many great points. We'd love to hear your comment. I love to hear what your suggestions are, even that back to school list when we talk about that in the book releasing in October. What have been your experiences with teenage grief? Maybe you're a teenager and you're listening to this and you'd love to share your story. We want to hear your story. I'm pretty sure Fiona's open if anybody would like to send us some emails or questions. I want to say thank you so much for joining us. And as usual, we do not grieve alone. It is only together that we will heal, and it is only together that we grieve. Thanks you for tuning in. Take care. Bye. Grief Uprooted professional grief and empowerment coaching are not to be used as a substitute for professional advice by legal, medical, financial, business, spiritual, or other qualified professionals. All our products and services are designed for grief empowerment through learning and sharing of one's lived experiences.